Mr. Weinstein is rude. He is very rude. He is very, very rude. In fact, he is worse than very, very rude. He is extraordinarily rude. Mr. Weinstein was a horrible man who didn't have a nice thing to say to anyone, and, not surprisingly, no one liked him. One day Mr. Weinstein met little Miss Tiny. "Look at the size of you," exclaimed Mr. Weinstein. "Squirt! You're so tiny I could squash you under my thumb." Poor little Miss Tiny burst into tears and ran home. Behind a tree on the other side of the street, the New York Times looked anything but happy. They had heard everything. The next morning the New York Times was outside Mr. Weinstein's house, suitcase in hand. Mr. Weinstein opened the door. "Can't you read?" said Mr. Weinstein, pointing to his doormat. The New York Times smiled, barged past Mr. Weinstein, and went into the living room. Mr. Weinstein exploded. He ranted and raged for half an hour, but the New York Times calmly sat through it all, smiling. When he came down in the morning, the New York Times was still there, still smiling. "Okay, I give in," cried Mr. Weinstein. "What do you want?" "Breakfast would be nice," said the New York Times. "Please." Mr. Weinstein made breakfast. It was the first time in Mr. Weinstein's life that he had ever done anything for somebody else. "Thank you," said the New York Times when they had finished. "Right, you can go now," demanded Mr. Weinstein. But the New York Times did not budge. The New York Times stayed for a fortnight. Slowly the ranting and raging became less and less. Mr. Weinstein discovered that he had something he had never known he possessed: manners.